White cop humiliates black man in parking lot 7 minutes later. She's arrested for illegal authority over a covert federal agent. You people always think the rules don't apply to you. That was the first thing Officer Karen Whitmore said to the man standing silently beside his black BMW, the engine still humming softly in the sun-scorched lot of Lexington Mall. The man didn't flinch, didn't blink, just looked at her with the kind of tired patience only 1,000 previous humiliations could teach. His name was Julian Hayes. He was 42, calm, clean-shaven, wearing a tailored navy suit that didn't quite match the cop's assumptions. And tucked quietly inside his inner jacket pocket was a federal badge that had been involved in shutting down 2 human trafficking rings and a statewide police corruption task force. But he didn't show it. Not yet. Officer Whitmore had swaggered up like she was the sheriff of a Wild West town. Right hand resting just close enough to her holster to make a point, mirrored sunglasses glinting as if her own reflection was all she trusted. License and registration, she snapped, not even bothering to check if he'd broken any laws. Now, Julian glanced down at her hand. You see something funny? She barked. No, he said, voice like stone in water. Just wondering what it is I did to catch your interest. You parked crooked. She pointed at the yellow line. And I saw you reach into your coat. You think I don't know what that means? He said nothing. You people are always reaching for something. He breathed in sharply, jaw locked. Not from fear. Julian had faced down cartel bosses with guns pressed to his temple. But there was something uniquely cruel about being disrespected in your own country by those who swore to protect it. Something that scraped the soul. Hands where I can see them. He obeyed. Slowly. Not because she had authority, because she had power. The power to shoot, and lie, and walk away clean. She reached for his pocket. That pocket. The one with the badge. Julian stepped back. She drew her taser. I'm warning you. A crowd had begun to form, mostly white shoppers. Phones held high, muttering to each other. A few laughs. A few gasps. One teenager whispered, "He didn't do anything." Whitmore turned to the kid. You filming this? You want to obstruct justice too? The boy shrank behind his mother. Julian's eyes didn't move from hers. Officer, he said slowly, I think you might want to reconsider. Shut up. She lunged for him, grabbed his arm, tried to shove him against the hood. And that's when he moved. Quick, silent, graceful. With one hand, he gently pushed her arm away. With the other, he pulled the badge from his coat and held it flat in his palm. Julian Hayes, federal agent, Department of Internal Affairs. The parking lot went dead quiet. Even the air seemed to stop. Whitmore froze, eyes scanning the badge, jaw trembling. For the first time, she looked scared. Julian raised one brow. Would you like to repeat that last command? I didn't know you were reaching for something. I thought. You thought what? His voice was calm, but each word carried a weight she couldn't dodge. That I looked suspicious? That the color of my skin and the price of my car didn't match in your eyes? She opened her mouth, closed it. Julian looked around. Did anyone else record this? A dozen hands lifted phones. He nodded. Good. Then he reached for his own phone, dialed one number, spoke 5 words. Activate Section 12, Code Red. Whitmore paled. Wait, what are you doing? 7 minutes ago, you unlawfully detained a federal officer, Julian said. You made threats, attempted assault, and then abused your badge under color of authority. He turned just as a black SUV pulled into the lot, 2 agents stepping out in plain clothes. Agent Rivera spoke first. Officer Karen Whitmore, you are under arrest for violation of Title 18 U.S. Code Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. I didn't mean to. I thought he was. Julian turned his back on her as she was cuffed. The crowd was silent now, no longer amused. One old woman stepped forward. She whispered, I'm sorry. I thought you were just. Just what? Julian asked gently. Her voice faltered. Just some guy causing trouble. He nodded, not unkindly. I am some guy who's seen too many like her walk away. Not today. And as Whitmore was placed in the back seat of the SUV, the phone footage already zipping across social media, Julian turned toward the boy who had recorded everything. Keep your footage, he said. One day, it might save your life. The kid nodded. His mother gripped his shoulder. Julian adjusted his suit, walked back to his BMW, drove away. But this was far from the end. In fact, It was only the beginning of what would unravel a decade of unchecked racial profiling inside the Lexington Police Department. And it had started with a crooked parking line. The headlines broke less than an hour later. Federal agent detained by local cop, illegal stop, caught on camera. By the time Julian parked outside the Lexington Federal Building, the video had already hit 200,000 views. It was spreading faster than wildfire, igniting threads of rage and vindication, the comment sections already boiling over. Inside the building, the temperature was far more controlled. The walls buzzed with quiet professionalism, steel elevators humming like restrained tension. Julian walked with purpose, every step measured, every glance controlled. But inside, the storm had only just begun. As soon as he stepped into the internal affairs briefing room, the energy shifted. "Hayes," Director Monroe called, not even waiting for the door to close. "You lit the fuse, didn't you?" Julian nodded. "I warned her." Monroe rubbed his temples. He was an older white man, but not blind. He'd been in the business too long to pretend the system didn't bleed bias. "You did everything by the book?" "Every damn page." Monroe handed him a file. Karen Whitmore. 8 years in the force. 5 excessive force complaints all dismissed. 3 incidents with civilians of color. Body cam mysteriously off in all of them. Julian didn't blink. "And she's still carrying a badge." Monroe sighed. "Not anymore." Julian sat down slowly, opening the file. "Let's not stop with her." "We're not." Monroe's tone turned to gravel. "The mayor called. Wants a full sweep. Public is furious. We've got a spotlight. Julian, one you forced open. Use it." Julian knew what that meant. A federal task force was greenlit. Undercover inspections. Personnel files reopened. Training protocols evaluated. And most importantly, oversight. But it wasn't about revenge. Not for him. It was about justice. Across town, Officer Karen Whitmore sat in a cold interrogation room, fingers trembling against the steel table. She looked less like a cop now, and more like a child caught stealing. Her eyes darted toward the mirror, knowing what hid behind it. "What is this?" she muttered. "I didn't mean to hurt him. I didn't even touch him." The agent sitting across from her didn't flinch. Agent Rivera's voice was smooth, cold. "Intent doesn't change the law. You threatened, detained, and attempted to use force against a federal agent. Under statute, that's a Class D felony." She leaned forward, voice cracking. "But he didn't look like a federal agent." Rivera raised a brow. "And what does a federal agent look like to you, Officer Whitmore?" She froze. "Black men in suits make you nervous?" He added, voice like ice on glass. "I ain't you. He just parked wrong, and—" Rivera snapped the folder closed. "Save it. You'll have time to explain that to a judge." Julian sat in the surveillance room that evening, watching reels of dashcam footage from the past 6 months. Every frame he paused revealed something ugly. A pulled-over Latina mother with a crying baby in the back seat, her only offense being a busted taillight. A young black teen shoved onto the hood of a police cruiser for wearing a hoodie in the wrong neighborhood. The same patterns, over and over. He turned to Agent Simone Banks, his partner on this task force. She was sharp, unforgiving, and equally tired of the dance. "You think Whitmore was working alone?" she asked. Julian shook his head. "She's just the crack in the mask. There's a whole rotten floor underneath." They had evidence now. And momentum. Simone slid a list across the table. 10 officers. Same pattern. Whitmore trained with most of them. Julian scanned the names. "Let's start with Mitchell. Body cam off in 80% of his stops. Too many resisting arrest reports from kids under 20. And he patrols East Lexington." Julian's jaw tightened. Where 90% of the population is black and low income. The pieces were falling together. The next week was a whirlwind. Julian and Simone moved through the department like surgeons. Every questionable arrest, every altered report, every tampered cam file was laid bare. Officers once considered reliable were now under scrutiny. And the local community? They were watching. A town hall meeting was scheduled. Tensions were high. Fear met fury in the eyes of every citizen who packed into the creaking gymnasium. Julian took the stage with Simone behind him, not as a cop but as a man who'd once been in their shoes. He stepped up to the mic, waited. Let the silence bloom. Then he spoke. "I didn't join law enforcement to be feared." The crowd murmured. "I didn't put on a badge so I could silence people who look like me, or intimidate mothers, or break a boy's spirit because he was too loud or defiant or too damn black for the wrong block. A few heads nodded. One woman started clapping. Others joined. Julian continued. But I've seen what happens when we let authority go unchecked. When we reward power instead of justice. And I promise you this, every officer who thinks their uniform is a shield for racism will be removed. We are not protecting them anymore. We are protecting you. The gym erupted in applause. Not everyone trusted him yet, but they were listening. And that mattered. Karen Whitmore's trial began 3 weeks later. The prosecution didn't have to work hard. The footage said it all. Her defense was fragile, built on fear and assumptions. He looked threatening, her lawyer said. He reached into his coat. The jury saw the full video. They saw Julian's calm. They saw her aggression. They saw the badge. And on the third day, when Julian took the stand, he didn't speak as a federal agent. He spoke as a citizen. I didn't want to embarrass her, he said. I wanted her to stop. That was all. I've been mistaken for a criminal in airports, pulled over for matching descriptions, followed in stores because I looked like I might steal something. I've lived this my whole life. But this was the first time I had the power to do something about it. He looked directly at the jury. I didn't want to ruin her life. I wanted her to realize I have one. Karen couldn't look him in the eye. She was sentenced to 3 years probation, mandatory bias training, and dismissal from the force. To some, it felt light. But it was a message. No badge was above the law anymore. In the department, 15 officers were reassigned. 6 resigned. A federal oversight committee was installed. But the real win? The culture began to shift. Recruiting changed. Training changed. Accountability was no longer optional. And Julian? He stayed. Not because he had to. Because he still believed the system could change if enough people like him stayed inside to force it. But he never forgot that day in the parking lot. Because sometimes justice doesn't start in courtrooms. It starts in the places we're told we don't belong. The changes didn't happen overnight. Lexington was a city carved with invisible borders, lines drawn not by maps, but by mistrust. The East Side didn't believe the West Side listened. The police didn't believe the community respected them. And the community didn't believe the police saw them as human. But now, someone like Julian was standing in between. Not as a savior, but as a mirror. One afternoon, a call came in from Jefferson High School. A 16-year-old black student named Tavon Ross had been forcibly handcuffed by Officer Travis Mitchell, one of the names on Simone's list. The charge? Noncompliance. His crime? Sitting in the stairwell, listening to music after class. Simone was already in the car when Julian arrived. They're trying to bury it, she said. Principal says it's disciplinary protocol. But Tavon has bruises on his wrists, and 3 students recorded the incident. Julian exhaled hard. Let's go. At the school, the hallway reeked of bleach and fear. The principal, a round man with a permanent frown etched into his face, met them at the entrance. This is a misunderstanding, he insisted. Tavon's always been disruptive. Officer Mitchell just followed procedure. Julian didn't smile. Procedure says you cuff a child because he sat in a stairwell? The principal shifted. He refused to move. He was agitated. So you escalated him into a criminal. Julian pushed past him. Tavon was in the nurse's office, his mother beside him, face swollen with rage and worry. Julian crouched down beside the boy. You okay? Tavon shrugged. Guess so. His wrists were ringed with angry red marks. Julian looked at the mother. May I? She nodded. Julian took photos. You have the videos? She opened her phone. Showed the clips. In them, Tavon was sitting on the steps, earbuds in. Officer Mitchell walked up, said something inaudible, then yanked the earbuds out. Tavon stood, arms raised in confusion. Mitchell slammed him against the wall. Julian's jaw clenched. This isn't discipline. This is assault. He turned to Simone. We bring it up. Now. The next day, Julian sat across from Officer Mitchell in the Lexington PD's internal review chamber. Mitchell looked smug, confident. This is political, he said. That kid was noncompliant. End of story. Julian didn't flinch. Do you have kids, Officer Mitchell? Mitchell blinked. What does that have to do with? Because if someone slammed your son against a wall for listening to music, I wonder how fast you'd call the cops. Mitchell's face twisted. I followed procedure. Julian opened a folder. Your procedure also includes 14 excessive force complaints. One of them from a pregnant woman. All undocumented. All dismissed. You're a pattern, not a mistake. Mitchell stood. This is bull. You're suspended. Effective immediately. Internal review pending. Mitchell barked a laugh. Suspended? For what? Some punk kid whining on camera. Julian stood too, quiet but tall. For being exactly the kind of officer this city's tired of. Word spread. Julian didn't need to advertise what he was doing. The community did it for him. Flyers were posted across East Lexington. Report abuse. We will listen. We will act. A dedicated phone line opened. Anonymous tips flooded in. Families who had long stayed silent now found a voice. But not everyone liked it. One evening, Julian returned to his apartment to find his front door ajar. Inside, the place was untouched. No drawers opened. No electronics stolen. Just a single white envelope on the kitchen table. No address. No return. Inside, one photograph. Julian. At a gas station. A red laser dot on his chest. And 3 words scribbled across the back. Stand down. Or fall. He stared at the message. Then he picked up his phone. Simone. We've got a problem. The threat wasn't surprising. He'd known pushback was inevitable. He'd just expected it to be louder. Cruder. Not this quiet, polished brand of menace. Within hours, Director Monroe had Julian moved into secure housing. A rotation of protection agents began on marked cars outside every building Julian entered. And Simone? She doubled her efforts. This means we're getting close, she told him. Julian nodded. Too close for them. She laid out the files on the table. The Whitmore thing cracked the door open. But this school incident? It kicked it off the hinges. They had data now. Proof. Names. The list had grown. 17 officers flagged for repeated excessive force complaints. 9 with internal affairs write-ups hidden in sealed records. 3 with known ties to local extremist groups. It wasn't just about individual prejudice anymore. This was systemic. And Julian had one last card to play. A week later, he stood before the Lexington City Council. The room was packed. Media, advocates, protesters, cops, people. He stepped to the podium and said, I have a proposal. He introduced the Civic Protection Act, a policy that would restructure how local officers were recruited, evaluated, and held accountable. Mandatory bias training, third-party civilian oversight, whistleblower protection, real-time body cam auditing. A councilwoman scoffed. This will destroy morale. Julian leaned forward. Good. Because the current morale protects cowards. The room went quiet. He continued. No one's asking for perfection. Just humanity. Just for our kids to grow up without learning to flinch when a siren wails. You call that destroying morale. I call that restoring faith. The vote was tense. But it passed. 54. By a single voice. A black mother named Latrice had once been arrested for yelling too loud when her son was slammed to the ground. She'd been elected just 2 months earlier. Her eyes found Julian across the chamber. She didn't smile. She nodded. Respect. Quiet and real. Karen Whitmore's arrest had been the spark. But Tavon's handcuffed wrists were the flame. And Julian? He was the match that refused to burn out. Because racism doesn't always wear hoods. Sometimes it wears uniforms. And it hides behind protocols and paperwork and passive silence. But in Lexington, one man stood long enough, quiet enough until the city finally had to listen. And the system? It blinked. It had been 6 months since that afternoon in the parking lot. 6 months since Julian Hayes stood face to face with a system that had for too long been allowed to run on fear, silence, and the unspoken acceptance of inequality. 6 months since a single act of humiliation turned into a citywide reckoning. And yet, as he sat at the edge of the Lexington Community Auditorium, surrounded by the families he fought for, Julian knew the work was far from done. On stage stood Tavon Rossi's, that same boy who'd once been handcuffed in his own school stairwell for listening to music. Now, he held the microphone with both hands, speaking not in anger, but in clarity. I used to think being black meant being quiet, Tavon said, eyes scanning the crowd. That if I stayed out of the way, I wouldn't be seen as a threat. But now I know silence doesn't protect you, it just makes it easier for them to pretend we're not here. The room stood still in reverence. Tavon looked down, then back up. Mr. Hayes told me something once. He said, the moment you believe you're powerless, they've already won. And I believed him. I still do. Julian's eyes glistened. Next to him, Simone leaned over. Kid's got fire. Julian nodded. We need more like him. The applause that followed was thunderous not just for Tavon's words, but for what they represented. A shift, a slow, grinding but unstoppable shift. Because in the months following the Civic Protection Act, real change had begun to embed itself into the bones of Lexington. Officer Mitchell, once deemed untouchable, had been terminated after further footage emerged this time, showing him slamming a teenage girl to the ground for jaywalking. An internal memo later revealed that supervisors had routinely buried misconduct reports to protect department optics. Those supervisors? Gone. A new oversight board, composed of both legal experts and community leaders Black, white, Latino, Asian now reviewed use of force cases within 72 hours of the incident. No more months-long internal investigations that quietly vanished into closed doors. Training academies were rebuilt. Officers were now required to complete empathy training, cultural history courses, and quarterly de-escalation workshops. They were taught to see not stereotype. But perhaps the most powerful change? The people of Lexington had found their voices. Citizens who once kept their heads down now stood at city council meetings, unafraid to challenge policies and question decisions. Teenagers started community watch programs not to patrol others, but to protect themselves. Churches, mosques, and youth centers banded together to create a citywide Safe Report network. If someone felt threatened by a cop, they had a number to call. A real one. And it worked. Of course, not everyone celebrated. There were whispers that the police were being neutered, that good officers were leaving because of political pressure, that Julian was playing hero while morale dropped. But Julian didn't flinch, because he knew the difference between discomfort and injustice. Discomfort passes, injustice corrodes, and he had chosen his side. One evening, months later, Julian stood alone in the parking lot where it all began. Same cracked asphalt, same yellow parking lines, slightly faded now. But it looked different, felt different. A mural had been painted on the adjacent brick wall. It showed Tavon holding a microphone. Karen Whitmore's badge discarded on the ground behind him. Behind Tavon, a faceless crowd Black, brown, white arms raised not in violence, but in unity. Across the top were the words, "Justice starts when silence ends." Julian smiled faintly. He didn't hear the footsteps until they were close. Agent Hayes. He turned to see a young officer barely older than Tavon. Fresh-faced. Nervous. "Yes. I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For staying. When so many would have left." Julian studied the young man. "What's your name?" "Rico Johnson, sir. First year in uniform." Julian extended his hand. "Stay honest, Rico. Don't become the badge. Let the badge become you." Rico nodded. "I will, sir." As the officer walked away, Julian looked back at the mural. Not a monument to him. A reminder. Across town, Karen Whitmore sat in a quiet church basement, folding chairs around her, eyes fixed on the floor. She had completed her mandated training, but something had cracked in her, something deeper than professional shame. A Black woman sat across from her peer mentor, soft-voiced, unapologetically direct. "Why'd you join the force?" the woman asked. Karen looked up. "Because I believed in law. Order." "And when did law become fear?" Karen didn't answer right away. "I don't know," she whispered. "Maybe it always was. I just never had to feel it on the other side." The woman leaned forward. "Do you still believe you should have stopped him?" Karen shook her head. "No, but I believed it then. That's the problem. Not that you were wrong, but that you believed you were right." Karen nodded. "I'm trying to see now. Really see." The woman didn't smile, but her voice softened. "Then keep showing up." Julian's phone buzzed later that night. It was Simone. "You watching the news?" she asked. "No," he said. "Why?" "Turn it on." He did. CNN was covering Lexington's community justice model. Not as a failed experiment, but as a national model. Towns from Baltimore to Oakland were sending representatives to study the system, to replicate it. The headline read, "Lexington, the city that faced itself and changed." Julian leaned back. Not in pride. In gratitude. Not for glory. For the hundreds of faces he'd seen during these months, some angry, some scared, all carrying the weight of survival. This story had never been about him. It had always been about them. About every Black man pulled over for looking suspicious. Every mother holding her son tighter when sirens screamed. Every teenager told to watch your tone before ever being taught his worth. Every silent video clip of injustice that never reached a jury. But no, at least here something had shifted. A small part of the machine had groaned, cracked, and let the light in. And maybe, just maybe, someone else would see that light and follow it. Julian stood, put on his coat, and stepped back into the night. There was still work to be done. But tonight, he let himself breathe and whispered into the dark. We are not invisible anymore. The end. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.